Well, hello. Welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. Louis Cennamo is an English bass guitarist, poet, creative writer, and healer. He has been credited as the creator of the electric bowed bass guitar. Louis played in many bands over his career, beginning in the early 60s through the 1980s and beyond, ranging from rock and blues to progressive and new age. The list of bands includes The Five Dimensions, with and without Jimmy Powell, The Herd with Peter Frampton, Patto's People, Chicago Line Blues Band, Renaissance with Jim McCarty, see my interview from February of this year, Colosseum, Steamhammer, Axis, Armageddon, Illusion, Stairway, and I'm out of breath, limited edition, and special edition. Louis also released a solo album, Diamond Harbour, in 1982, and a New Age album entitled Freedom, Relaxation Music with Michael Timothy in 1997. More recently, my guest has been writing poetry and short stories, and an autobiography is in the works. Well, welcome, Louis.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you for joining us today. Well, take us back to the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in North London, in Haringey. It's a suburb of North London, Greg. And I spent mostly the first 15, 20 years of my life living at home with an Italian family, or Anglo-Italian, if you like. So, yeah, you ask me, and then I'm just going to show you this, but I don't know if this is. We're not televising, but
go ahead. There's the bow. Hold it up a little bit. Let's see. Raise it up a little higher. There we go. Right there. That's perfect. Yes, with the bow. Yeah. Yes.
This comes with a story, Greg, and at some point I'll tell you it if it fits in with it. It's a very funny story. I'm just writing about it at the moment.
Okay. Do you have fond childhood memories, in particular, remembering hearing music in the household when you were young?
Yes, very, very much so, yeah. The family house was, it belonged to my maternal grandparents, basically, and my mum was, a very close Italian family, although it's over generations, but very much Italians keep Italianness in their DNA, should we say.
Yeah.
So I was brought up, to be music was all over the house, radio on, relatives coming from Italy, guitarists in the family as well, an accordion player. But at the age of 4, I was totally surrounded by music. They even gave me a little old gramophone to play my own records on. So I remember being very happy when I was 4, because all I had to do really before school came and ruined it all was just play my records and sing along to them, as well. So it was quite a fun time, really. This was like just after the war, about 1950-ish, something like that. And I was just fell in love with music in all ways from that point. I think I came in with it actually as well. So,
can you recall one of the earlier singles or albums that you got?
Well, as a little boy, you mean, or
yes.
As a little boy? Well, they were my father's records mainly. They were like anything from Italian folk music from Naples, or it would be something like opera, some operatic records. And I used to identify them by the color of the label. So the classic ones were His Master's Voice with the dog on the front and everything.
Yes, right.
And so I would pick out according to the label that attracted me most often. I took a blue one. The Neapolitan folk songs were often green or blue labels, and the other ones were red, His Master's Voice one. So whatever I felt like, I'd pick it up, wind up this old gramophone, and
color coding. I like that.
It was all color coded, yeah. And I used to try to sing along, but although my parents never encouraged me to speak Italian, because they spoke to each other in English, because my mum was another second generation Italian or third generation. So she didn't speak Italian very well. She spoke Neapolitan dialect a little bit, but she was born in North London and brought up in North London. So even though it was very Italian atmosphere, we had the best of both worlds, really, because it was all English as well. My gran could make the most wonderful English or Italian food. She didn't mind which one.
I love it. I love Italian.
It's easy to love, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. Well, yeah. Do you remember the first musical instrument that you learned to play?
I do, yes. As I mentioned previously, two of my uncles played guitar, and one of them played very, very basic guitar. He wasn't really a guitarist. He was a lovely, pious man. He was my father's cousin, and he was a very gentle soul. And he used to come and take me sometimes back to his house not far away, and he would show me his guitar and things. And he couldn't play it very well, but for me then, because I didn't play at all, it was always really nice. So he encouraged me to to keep playing. And then one day he turned up with an old battered up guitar that he bought for 30 shillings, which is about $1 or less than $1. And I, it had, the neck was like about an inch away from the keyboard, the fingerboard. Very, very tough action. Of course, that's, for me, it was wonderful. So I learned to play basic little things on this guitar he bought me, and gradually that led to a momentum of more things happening, which then led to me switching to bass eventually as well. But never giving up guitar totally, because it's my second instrument, the sixth string.
Oh, okay. Would you play along to records you would put on the gramophone or the record player and play along to them?
Yeah, this was a bit later. I think he bought me that guitar when I was about 12. So I'd gone through various stages with music since then. And we were listening a lot to the radio. It was radio mainly before. I think we did have a TV by then, but the radio programs had the best music on them, really, like Radio Luxembourg.
Luxembourg, I was just going to say, yeah.
That's a big one at that time. So they would play, a lot of music as well. And I had an older sister who was really 3 years older than me. So when I was 12, she was 15. And she had quite a big influence on me as well, because she loved all the American bands, all the music. And Chuck Berry was one of her great favorites. So when I later became toured with Chuck Berry, she couldn't believe it. She was amazed that her little brother was back with Chuck Berry on a tour and playing on a record with him. So it all happened rather quickly, Greg, really. So, I think back on it, from the time I got that first guitar at about 12, then about 4 years later, I left school early. And one of the people that you didn't mention in your introduction was I was playing with 2 friends, and one of them was Rod Stewart, because we came from the same area in London, and Rod was in the 5 Dimensions.
5 Dimensions,
yeah. Right. So we were then determined to turn professional without any work at 16. Yeah. Yes. And my parents actually, they supported me, even though they were a bit worried, I think, but because I was still living at home. So at 16, Rod, this guitarist who was Rod's, brought Rod to the rehearsal with us. So we got a drummer in, and we thought, well, we're going to turn professional. You know, we had no work, of course, nothing. We just knew that that's all we wanted to do, you know. So
Well,
the
that
Dimensions was born then, if you like, you know.
okay. That was leading up to my next. I did have that as a note that it originally included Rod Stewart.
Mm,
I guess I wanted to hedge a little bit and not do too much name dropping in the intro. So
yeah.
even though
Oh,
it's a lot of bands, but yeah. So
oh,
you how long was Rod in the Dimensions, the five dimensions?
well, it was probably about a year, I think, all in all, because we started very early on, and then the momentum, because we were, you know, we were just sort of enjoying the flow of it all. It just seemed to come so easily to us, you know. Suddenly, we had no work, so we went for an audition with this singer who was with this top agency, and they'd advertised for a band for their backing singer who'd just come back from Hamburg, where he'd been working with the Beatles, and it turned out to be Jimmy Powell, the singer. So we went and with Rod as our singer, we went and auditioned for him. And so he loved the band and said, well, you know, why don't we do a set, and Rod can do one half, and I'll come on and do the main second half, because Rod was still, you know, we were still basically very inexperienced still, even though, you know, he had the same voice then, and you know, we were good for our age, we put it that way. So we started working and practicing with him, and within a very short time we were, you know, we were being picked up and working 6-7 nights a week around the country in the UK. So it was very, very fascinating how quickly it happened, really.
Yes, yes. Well, do you recall any of those early shows?
Well,
Any memories there?
I think it was destiny, really, Greg, because the earliest things we did really were American air bases.
Okay,
We
okay.
used to play a long set for the airmen, and sometimes for the officers, sometimes for the airmen, you know, as well, up in East Anglia in England, around Norfolk and Suffolk areas of England. And we got quite experienced from doing that, because we do long sets, so it gave us a lot of playing involved as well. And we also saw some sad things with that as well, which I don't know if I should tell you about, really, because it's, oh, I've given it away a bit now, haven't I? Do you want to hear them? Well, not really sad, but they were an eye opener for the musicians, really. And we
Sure.
realized that there was some sort of something going on between the black airman and the white airman that was not very comfortable to be around, because
Okay.
yeah, the basically what happened was that, because we were doing this long set, some of the airmen were musical or singers or whatever. And one day a guitarist came up, a white guitarist came up, and he sat in with us. And of course that went down very well with one half of the room, which was white. You see, the other half of the room were black airmen. So then one of the black airmen got up to ask if he could sit in and sing with us. And we said, yes, it'd be lovely. But then the white sergeant or whatever he was said, oh no, you'll have to sit down. So he wouldn't allow him to sing with the band. And I thought, well, this is funny. Why are they doing that? I was very innocent, really. You know, I didn't think there was going to be some segregation going on at that time. But don't forget, this was very early on, 1962, 3, you know.
Okay.
And so, you know, I learned a little bit about some of the tensions maybe that were in America, because they were lovely people, nearly everyone, but there was this segregation there, which I really didn't know anything about at the time.
Well, I think that's why a lot of the black artists here, the big ones, were so welcome. Well, not why, but they were so much more welcome there across the pond, you know.
Yeah,
And because I know there was some racism, everywhere, but you guys were a little bit more colorblind, I think,
yeah,
and just appreciate it. And so many musicians were into that early R&B, black soul, and
yes,
music,
yes.
anyways. So you guys welcomed them.
Yeah, they were welcomed, and ironically, by people like Eric Clapton and other members of the Yardbirds as well. And in fact, that's why we got very experienced very early on, a bit later than this, where we were doing all these gigs around the country. And then, we started backing them all, Chuck Berry, Sister Rosetta, suddenly at 17, 18, I was backing Sister Rosetta on a tour, Chuck Berry on a tour at 18 years old, I thought, well, that's
Right,
normal, that's what people do.
right, right, right. And, and then some of them ended up relocating, moving over there and living there. Well,
Yeah,
Jimi Hendrix, really made it over
yeah,
there.
well, that's
So,
right. Hendrix came over because the Animals, it was Chaz Chandler, I think, that brought him over, wasn't it?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, and because all the bands sort of were traveling at that time, like the Animals, the Yardbirds. I got to know the Yardbirds a little bit, and because we used to support the Stones on gigs. We used to support the Yardbirds on gigs, Manfred Mann sometimes, because they were all with the same agency, a lot of them. So, I got very experienced early on because of all this and, sharing dressing rooms with them. And I'd actually met Jim and Keith, before I actually joined, started Renaissance with them because we'd be on the same bill somewhere or something.
Okay.
But we never
Well,
talked until I joined Renaissance. Well, we didn't
is
get
that
to talk.
is that right? Then you joined the herd the herd with Peter Frampton.
Yeah,
How did
eventually,
that come
yes.
about? Yeah.
Well, how that came about was because all the bands they'd often meet up in motorway cafes on the way back from gigs, say in the north of England or the south of England. They'd meet up in various motorway cafes at 2 o'clock in the morning or something, the only place you could get something to eat after a gig, So we'd often rub shoulders with each other. The one tour, one time when I was with Chuck Berry touring, was we came to this very well-known motorway cafe where all the bands stopped after gigs. And Tina Turner's whole setup was in there, and Chuck Berry's came in as well. So the place was full of musicians.
Yeah, yeah.
So, it was just, bands just, that's how they got to know each other. And eventually with the herd, because when the Dimensions finally folded, our manager at the time was friends with the Herd's manager, which was Billy Gaff, who later became Rod Stewart's manager. And one day, Billy realized, he'd seen me playing with Sister Rosetta and all those things. So he actually came up and invited. He said, "Well, look, the Herd need a bass player. Are you interested?" And I didn't really know much about the material. It was before Peter had joined the band, actually. And so I went along and I got on very well with them. And so I joined the band. And that's how it turned out. And Peter came along a bit later because he was younger. You see, he came a little bit
Yes,
later. So that's another funny story if you want to hear
yes,
it.
yes, I do.
You
Yes,
want
I
to hear
do.
that? All right. The story of what happened with Peter Frampton, who later became, a really good friend. He was at school still when I started with the home. We did quite a lot of gigs in south of London, in the Surrey, Kent area, which is where they're from. And Peter was at school still at 15, totally in love with music like me and others, and he had told his parents, and his father was the headmaster of a school that David Bowie was a pupil at as well. And Peter had met Bowie as well, and they talked about music and stuff, and he got really interested in it. So Peter just told his parents, who a headmaster, very conservative sort of background, that he wanted to become a professional musician and he wanted to do it now. So his parents invited us round, and we had to sort of say to them, they were very nice as well, but they were concerned about their 15-year-old son just coming on 16. So we said, well, look, he said, well, look, we would have to guarantee that he earned a certain amount of money, which was not a lot of money at the time, but. And so we said, well, look, okay, we can do that because we're working 6-7 nights a week. So I think reluctantly at first they persuaded. They were persuaded to let him join the band. And then we did. I think the band was becoming more and more popular at that time because we got some big time managers as well in, and they wanted to turn the band in. So we were looking at ourselves as a serious musician band, and the management wanted pop stars, really. They wanted rock and roll stars. And that's where I started to feel really uneasy as well, because I always saw myself serious musicians. I still do, really. So that's what was going in that direction. And eventually we got to a point where, even though they were uneasy about it, the herd realized that, that the management were meaning to make them into rock stars, basically, or pop stars at least. And that's when I left, and then they started to have their hit records as well.
Well, let me ask you this about you. You mentioned that Peter's parents acquiesced.
Yeah.
How about your parents? I didn't ask you about that.
Oh, my parents.
Were they all gung ho for you to become a musician?
Well, yes, they were, and they were lovely. My parents were. I think they realized that how much love I had for the music, and how I was not interested in the curriculum of the grammar school that I originally thought was going to be really important in my life. But when I found the curriculum to be nothing like what I was interested in, they supported my music as well, even though they must have been worried, at some point that, I was going in a direction where, it would not work out, if you like. But once they started seeing that it was working out, of course, then they got very proud and started to get more, show off to the family about their son backing all these important musicians and whatever.
It's funny how that happens when you start getting a little popular. Yes. Well,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I had one relative, actually. He was a lovely man. He was my uncle. But when he first heard me playing, he was quite old-fashioned as well. And he used to say to me things like, "Oh, don't waste your time with that." He said, that's a waste of time. Don't do any, just get yourself a nice steady job like me, So I ignored him, obviously, and then eventually he got to see me playing on TV and things, and he actually changed his complete tune. He said, "Well, you remember I said I believed in you and you were going to make it."
Right.
He completely turned it right round to suit himself. So I agreed with him because he was a lovely man.
then you're like, I don't seem to remember it that way, but okay.
Well, no, I because there was so much love, because he was my mum, he was related to my mum, and I just felt, I'll play along, so,
Yes. Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you, were you with the Herd when they had some of their early singles, like He Was Really Saying Something?
I played on one Herd single. Yeah, it was a Mick Jagger and
the So Much in Love, So Much in Love.
Yeah, that's the one I played on. Yeah.
Oh, okay, you played on that one. Well, I wanted to say first about He Was Really Saying Something. It was originally a song by the Velvets. I believe they were the first ones to do it. But then a lot of bands like the Herd changed it from he to she. She was really saying something. So it's the same song. And then, of course, for years later, Bananarama, had I guess a hit with it, but they did well with it. But yeah, the So Much in Love, when I saw that, I read that, I said, oh, I think I know that song. And my favorite rendition of the song, and I believe it predates the Herds, is The Mighty Avengers. Do you recall them, that band, The Mighty Avengers?
You don't mean the guitar band, the Avengers? No, that's the.
No,
No, I'm
not the
thinking.
American. This is the British band, the Mighty Avengers.
No, no.
John Paul Jones was involved in the band somehow. I don't think
Okay.
he played, but I think he might have engineered or something.
Well, John Baldwin, as he was, John Paul Jones was a session musician. So he
Yes,
used to do a lot of the sessions for bands that couldn't play very well, basically, as well. So he might have been brought in to be the bassist for that particular session. Him and Jimmy Page used to work together quite a bit, and John McLaughlin as well.
John McLaughlin. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. There was but it's a really kind of a more bouncy arrangement.
Yeah.
It's really nice. But it had Tony Campbell, Mike Linnell, Teddy Mann, and Biffo Beach. Biffo. Okay.
What sort of date was that then, Greg? Have you got the date there?
The date? Yes, it was 64, so I think it does predate the Herds.
Yeah,
1964.
yeah. I think they probably they were probably together then, but
Right.
don't know if they had recorded anything then.
Well, I think you already mentioned how long you were in the Herd. You weren't there too long.
Let's have a think. Well, it was 19, yeah, it was quite a while actually, probably 18 months even. It was
Okay.
Yeah, I joined in sometime in 65, I think, later in the year, after the Dimensions had broken up.
Okay.
And then I to or probably late 66, early 67, so something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then came Patto's people with Mike Patto, which changed the name to Chicago Line Blues Band.
Yeah.
Yes. How did that come to pass, and how long were you?
Well, it's a little bit hazy this for me, but I met Patto during the Chuck Berry tour because he was a bit the compere for the show. He used to introduce every now and then. He'd tell these funny jokes, and he was like an introduction
MC kind of.
Yeah, MC, and so he would introduce everyone, and so I got friendly with him from then as well. And when later, I think it was after, oh God, it's a little bit hazy now. It was that we did I did some sessions in between for a band called Jody Grind with Tim Hinckley and
Tim Hinckley, right?
Yeah, and others, and basically they were all friends of Patto's because they all came from the same part of Norfolk in East Anglia, and so we got quite friendly. And the drummer and guitarist called Ivan Zani as well was in the band. He came from an Italian background as well, and we just knock around, we meet up and things like that. I did a session for Jody Grind as well during that time. What did you ask me? I've forgotten the actual question. So many things. I've got my fingers.
Well, that's okay. You said when you said it was hazy. If it's not hazy, then you weren't really there, right?
Exactly. Yes. All of this was all made up,
Right.
Yeah. No. There was a sort of a shady period after I left the Herd, really. Yeah. And before I started doing the James Taylor album, there was a period I did some stuff in between, and one of those was the Chicago Line Blues Band, which was often called on my Wikipedia page, it's called Chicago Blue Line, but we called it the Chicago Line Blues Band, which was an old jazz pianist had started this thing, and I think he dropped out, and Tim joined this band, and we did some gigs as well as this lineup with Mike Patto was involved, Tim Hinckley, and some others, some black musicians as well, some really talented horn players as well. Mike Falana and Pete King. His name was a black musician. There were two Pete Kings who were jazz musicians. One was white, one's black. This was the black one, and we did a few gigs around the country, but we didn't really have any management or anything, and it eventually folded. So then that's how it all came about to be.
We'll talk about the James Taylor. Very interesting that, recording on Apple like he did.
Well, I was being urged to do more and more sessions at that time as well, because I was a bit frazzled after finishing with the herd. Really, didn't really want to go straight back on the road. I wasn't really that keen, and someone said, "Well, why don't you do sessions? You've got all the ingredients for that." So I looked into it, and for a while I was thinking about doing that, and then one day I started to get a feeling again for going on the road, because it's always something a musician loves to do, to share on that level with an audience. Live audience. So I looked into it and I thought, well, okay, I'll do what a lot of musicians do. They'll look into this music paper called The Melody Maker, which had all the ads of, all the people looking for musicians. So one day I'd looked into The Melody Maker and there were all these flashy ads in there. It looked very impressive, but there was one little one that just said, one sentence more or less, said Apple Records require bass player for new artists. This one is the one that interested me. I thought, why is it so small? But wait a minute, Apple, that's the Beatles, isn't it? So I looked into it and I thought, well, okay, I'll go along. And so do you want to hear the story of what happened?
Yes, I do.
So anyway, I got my friend to give me my lift with my bass, and we went, took a journey to Baker Street, where the Beatles owned a clothes shop at the time, and they had offices above the clothes shop, and that's where the auditions were taking place. So I went along with my friend. He dropped me off at the bass, and I looked across the road at it was the other side of the road where the building was. And there was a queue of bass players coming out of this shop door, going round the corner and completely out of sight. And out down the road, it was like hundreds of them. I thought, oh, sod that. I said, I'm not going to queue up. I was proud pro by then, so I'm not going to queue. I was about to turn around and go home. And from the top window where the shop was, above the shop where the offices were, someone called out my name, and he said, "Look," and I looked up, and it was this guy. I didn't really recognize him. He said, "Do you remember me from the herd days? We used to support you." He said, wait a minute, I'll come down." And so he came down past all these bass players on the stairs, and he said, "Don't worry about queuing up. Come up with me." He said, because he told me about he was in this support band that he support the herd a lot in this band, and he was the singer from this band called John's Children. He said, "Well, come upstairs with me," he said, and there was a bass player on every step as I went up, and I felt very embarrassed, because he took me right to the top of the stairs where the offices were, and there were two doors there, and one, he said, "Well, wait here," he said, "and I'll sort something out." He said, "Just wait, just sit there by this door." So all these bass players.
Before you continue, John's Children, wasn't that the T-Rex, Mark Bolan? Wasn't Mark Bolan in John's Children?
I don't think it was. You check that out. It might have been. That would be quite funny if it was.
Yeah. Why did I? Yeah, because that rings a bell. John's.
I don't even remember.
Yes. Well, Mark Bolan. Yes, John's Children.
Was it John's Children?
Mark Bolan was in that.
Well, we're finding out something new for me there.
I thought that
if he was in the band with this guy.
Very familiar.
It would, it would be really, because they did quite a few shows supporting the Herd. And another one was Ronnie Wood's band, the Byrds, you know, the English version of the Byrds.
Yes.
Yeah, they
Right.
used to support the Herd there as well. So,
Yes.
you know, that was another connection I'll tell you about a little bit. But I was sitting outside the door there, looking very, you know, waiting to see what's going to happen. Then the door opens and James Taylor's there, and he said, "Oh, Louis, so nice to meet you. Come on in." So I go, "Okay." Oh, before that happened, there are two characters that were sort of shielding their face a bit past me, and I thought, this is funny. So they look a little bit familiar from the back, you know. I'll tell you who it was in a minute. You'll probably guess.
Okay.
So I walked in. So I started playing a blues with James, and as I was doing this, I noticed there was a desk on one side of the room with two people crouched behind it. I couldn't see who they were or anything. Anyway, they were listening while we were playing this 12-bar blues. And so when it finished, they got up, and one of them said to James, "Oh, I told you it'd be all right, James, nothing to worry about. You know, you worry too much, you know." And that was John Lennon talking to Ringo. Well, Ringo was standing next to him. And they smiled very warmly at me, which made me think, I think I might have done all right here. That's how it began.
That's
so here I was, rubbing shoulders with the Beatles.
That's fascinating. Well, let me ask you, the member John's children, was it John Hewlett?
Yeah, must have been. Yeah, he was the lead singer, I think.
Okay, because I got John Hewlett, Chris Townsend, Andy Ellison. Yeah, okay, and Jeff McClelland. So
not Mark Bolan, though.
Not and he was at one point, but
he might have left to become a big star by then.
Yes,
yeah. So that's
briefly. He was briefly in the band. It says very briefly.
Must have been John Hewlett then, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never remembered his name since. Give me some news there.
Who was it that introduced you to Jim McCarty and Keith Relf?
It was a guy called Peter Gage, who was in a band called the Ram Jam Band. And they were quite big at the time, but this time he had come off the road because he'd become a fixer, someone who fixes sessions for people looking for musicians. And after the Yardbirds split in 1968, well, basically what happened before that, I finished working with Apple and James. James had to go back to America because he wasn't well and things were going on, but he was going to come back to England. But then I started doing sessions for Pete Gage, and James didn't come back till later anyway. And it was by that time, you know, things had changed for both of us. So Peter got me doing sessions for him. So I did quite a lot of sessions for him. And towards the end of 1968, I was basically a session player for him more than anything else. And then one day, Jim, the Yardbirds split up, and Jim contacted Pete Gage looking for a bass player for some new project they wanted to do with him and Keith. And so Pete Gage gave Jim my number.
Okay. And that's how. And you guys hit it off pretty well.
Well, we hit it off amazingly well. Because I hadn't really planned on going back on the road that quickly, really, until Jim told me. He said, "You know, do you fancy coming over to Surrey, to Keith's house? We're gonna set up something. We'll see if we can get something together with that will include bass as well." You see, so I went down to Keith's house by the river in the River Thames in Sunbury on Thames. And Jim and Keith were there with Keith's wife and a little baby, which turned out to be his son, Jay, you know, a little bit later. And so we just hit it off. And, you know, they remembered me because we'd shared dressing rooms before that when I was with the Five Dimensions, you know, as well. But they didn't recognize me until I turned up there, you know. And so they started playing me some stuff and giving me an idea of what they wanted to do. So we want to do something like nothing like the Arbors, really, something that is, you know, like what we're working on now, these songs that we're writing as things as well. He said, but we wanted to incorporate into that some sounds as well and do a live show with some of the things. And Keith started playing me some of the sounds of things that they wanted to do. And there were things like Lancaster bombers taking off and with all these sort of strange effects and stuff. And it made me laugh. And I said, and it made me sort of, I said, well, it sort of hit me in the astral, you know. It's just sort of, and we all burst out laughing. That was it, you know. We just fell in love with the idea of creating this very unusual music, a unique blend of music. And you know, I said, well, I think the bass will work really well with this, because I can see that, you know, what you're doing is where I want to go with my music as well, you know. So we started thinking, then, well, like you said, well, Paul Samuel Smith had introduced them to a pianist that they wanted to bring down and play with me as well. And Keith said, well, look, let's try it out with piano and bass, you know, as well, and just see how it goes. And then Keith said, yeah, my sister was also interested in singing with a band as well. She's never sung with anyone before, but, you know, she's got friends in Cornwall. One of them turned out to be this lady, Betty Thatcher, who later became a very important writer of songs for the later Renaissance lineup, you know, with Annie Haslam and co. So we started, we arranged to do a session at Jim's little cottage in Surrey, and brought John Hawken down as well. Yeah. And they brought down another musician who, last minute addition, which was Jane was there as well, and of course, you know, brother and sister stuff as well. So it was lovely. So I hit it off immediately with John Hawken, you know, because we had a similar vibe to what we were doing. But they brought along a musician called B.J. Cole.
Yes, pedal steel player.
Pedal steel, and you know, he was a lovely, lovely guy. He came with his dad. His dad gave him, because he was very young as well, and his dad gave him a lift there. So we tried it out with that lineup, with Jane singing a little bit, Keith and Jim showing me their songs. We tried a few songs with this lineup, you know, with bass, piano, Jane singing a bit, mainly Keith singing at that time, and Jim on drums, and BJ Cole on on the pedal steel. But Jim and Keith, although they loved him as a guy, I think that they felt it was too much with piano, bass, and pedal steel. So that didn't materialize for him. He became well known on the instrument a bit later with that. But so the basic lineup was formed then. Really, it was Keith, Jim, Jane, me, and John Hawken.
Yes, I find it I find it fascinating that Jim and Keith, you know, after being in an R&B, basically an R&B band, you know, wanted to go in this different direction like this, you know.
Yeah, I think basically they had a lot of stuff going on with touring in the States. They were pretty exhausted, really, which is one of the things that eventually, you know, made it hard for the band to continue touring after with the American tour, though we did do some gigs for a while. But they wanted to do something more gentle, but with a kick as well. You know, it had to have this balance of, because I still had this idea of doing these sounds as well, incorporating that. But that only lasted one gig, really, the first gig we did, because we dropped it after a while, when we realized that the bass and the bass, drums, and the piano were very dynamic together.
Yes,
we realized it wasn't only a gentle album, it's going to be with a kick, you know, and with this very sort of special connection with bass and piano and drums and vocals. sort of blending in this sort of folksy and classical thing. It was the beginning of Renaissance, the classical rock band, really. That started with our experimenting then. Because John, he was literally started playing early on. He started going into bits of Beethoven and stuff, and then the others, he would play in the intervals sometimes. He'd play a bit of Beethoven, and they say, "Oh gosh, I wonder if that would work with this song." So that's how Kings and Queens came about. Other things, and then John and I started. We'd go off sometimes down to his parents' home, where there was a grand piano in his mum's house in Weybridge, and we'd try to experiment with playing the bass and piano in unison, and so he'd play a bit of Beethoven, for example, and I would say, "Oh, well, let's try this with the bass doing the same as your left hand or your right hand." And that's how it gradually started to evolve, into Kings and Queens, and me and John playing fast passages in unison.
Okay. Well, I have a copy of Illusion, the album Illusion, which later on would be the name of the band, once you reunite under that name. But yeah, that's got some Love Goes On, Golden Thread. I really like that one. And Face of Yesterday. Those are all nice.
The first version of it with Jane singing. Yeah. She reprised it in later with Illusion, the band.
Yes.
When we reformed the band, at that time. But also on that album was a sort of track that has got quite a lot of play since. It was when the band had broken up as such. I went back to do sessions with them to finish off the tracks that we did. John was working with Spooky Tooth by then, I think. So I got Don Shin in to play harpsichord-y stuff on that track, which is called, that was one of their long tracks on the album, which it's one of my favorite tracks, actually.
Past Orbits
in Dust. Past Orbits in Dust, that was the one. And so that came about, and that's where I brought Don Shin in to play, where John Hawkins was already unavailable at that time with other things. So Spooky Tooth, I think it was, he always wanted to play with. So that track gave me and Don Shin some scope to improvise as well. So, but it fitted this lovely song that Keith and Jim had created called Past Orbits and Dust. And it was just lovely, and Jane singing it so lovely as well. So we had also a chance to improvise with piano and with bass and harpsichord, as well. But it was only that one track. I think we did that one.
I love the harpsichord.
It was lovely, wasn't it? Don was a lovely guy.
Well, fast forwarding again, how did you come to join Colosseum? That was Dave Greenslade and Clem Clemson were in that band.
And John Heisman, of course, his band.
Yes.
And Dick Hextall-Smith, who I'd known a little bit before then as well, because we had toured with Chuck Berry tour with the Graham Bond organization, which was basically Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker, Dick Hextall-Smith. And we all toured in this big coach around the country with the Chuck Berry, and I used to sit next to Chuck Berry's sister, and Chuck Berry he didn't tour, he didn't come in the coach with us because he didn't get on very well with another member of the things, but I don't want to go into slagging everyone off or anything.
That's
he had a bit of an issue with one of the other members of the on the tour and stuff. So it was a lovely fun coach ride around the country basically with Chuck Berry, and of course I got then to know, I'd already met Dick Hextall-Smith at that time. So when it came to me playing with Colosseum, how it came about was that we were doing a Renaissance gig in Birmingham with Renaissance, and I had this amazing pedal which was the same pedal that Jimi Hendrix used to get some really great sounds. So I used to use it for bass solos at the end of Renaissance set. And it turned out that we were doing it at a gig in Mothers in Birmingham. And I used to finish the set with this big solo, which was using this pedal that was the Jimi Hendrix pedal, which Keith's friend had given Jimi Hendrix this pedal. It was a guy called Roger Mayer who had created this pedal for Jimi Hendrix. And he brought one down one day to his friend Keith when we were rehearsing Renaissance. And he said, well, Keith, would this be any use to you, this pedal? I mean, Hendrix is using it. And he said, I don't think it'd be a bit too much for me, but maybe Louis could use it on the bass because he does this very fancy solo on the bass at the end of the set. So I tried it on the bass, and it just blew the room out, basically. On the bass doing this thing. So then I started using it for the end of the Renaissance set, and it used to blow people's mind. It so happened that night when I did it at Mother's Club in Birmingham, Clem Clemson was in the audience, and he came down to see me play, basically, because he was thinking of he'd seen me playing with Renaissance already. He's thinking of what was happening, because he had heard some rumors that Renaissance might be breaking up. So we did this thing, and I opened up into this solo, and it sort of blew his mind, basically. And he came back and he said, I don't want to sort of cause any trouble, you and the band, he said, but we're starting this big tour soon with Colosseum, and if Renaissance are breaking up, would you be interested? And I said, well, I'll think about it. He said, I wasn't sure if it was going to break up then. But so very soon after it did break up, and he got wind of it and called me one day. Said, do you want to come down and play with Colosseum? And we'll see, if you'd like to do this really important set of gigs we've got coming up. He said, but they're in jeopardy, basically, because we haven't got a bass player for it. So I went and did a session with them, and it was very uncomfortable for me because it was totally different from anything. The Colosseum was already formed, everything. There was no room for an inventive, creative bass.
Okay, yeah.
So I had to sort of struggle with it a bit. But I did decide, I did do it for them because I didn't want them not to be able to do it, basically, and they hadn't got anyone else at that time. So I ended up doing these amazing gigs with them, really, and basically I sort of worked it out with them, but I wasn't comfortable with it, and they could see that it wasn't really my bag either. So eventually it only lasted about 2 months or so. So I left, and they got Mark Clark in, who was more suited to what they were doing, I think. As well.
Okay. Well, you did play live with them at the Bath Festival, right?
Well, we did some enormous gigs. That was the most enormous ones. We did all these Oxford and Cambridge May balls and things like this as well. They were all big gigs in tents, marquees and everything, touring in Germany, that big festival that you saw the poster for.
Yeah.
So, when I remember when we did that gig, that was the first time I saw Steamhammer play, and I was very impressed with their lineup as well, with Martin and things. I hadn't seen them before. And I think this is a really nice band, I really like what they're doing, because they were doing all these long, drawn out guitar solos and little bits of bass, but mainly guitar. And I was very impressed with Martin Pugh's playing. I hadn't played and met him yet or anything. And that's a story to come as well for you. So anyway, it stuck in my mind. And somebody from a young German journalist asked me, he said, well, he said, it's really good to see you again after Renaissance. Are you going to stay with Colosseum? And at the time I said, well, yes, that's to my, I said uncomfortably, yes, because I didn't want to make a big fuss about it at that time. But I knew that what Colosseum was doing, as good as a beautiful band, lovely people, but there was no room for a creative bassist like me, in anyway. Maybe for Mark Clark, certainly, but
for me, it didn't suit my style at all, because they had already got everything that they seemed to want from a bass, and I had to sort of just play, the set that they did, which
it was more a little more structured, a little more structured.
It was, yeah. Renaissance was very completely opposite to that, really. And later, I didn't realize at the time, but later Steamhammer was ideal for it. That's when I played it to my best, really, was with Steamhammer, this solo.
Was that when you introduced the bow? When did the bow come into your repertoire?
Yeah, the bow came with Steamhammer, yeah. Although I was aware that Jimmy Page had used it with the Yardbirds, but in a very different way. And it wasn't influencing me at all to being attracted to the bow. But I think what it was that with Steamhammer, what we started to play together, how I got to join Steamhammer was funny, because I had it in the back of my mind that, it's a nice band, but I didn't think of joining them or anything. But then I went back to the Melody Maker one day after the sessions had finished with Pete Gage, and with all the gigs with Colosseum. I was thinking, what creative thing would be better now? And I didn't think of Steamhammer at all. But I went back to the Melody Maker, and there were some ads in the Melody Maker, one of which was from Steamhammer, which I didn't realize until I suddenly thought, oh God, it's Steamhammer. They're looking for a bassist.
Well, and that was a good source.
It was another divine coincidence, you could call it, in a way, because what happened was that I didn't know who the band was when they first, their roadie sort of picked the phone up to me, and he said later, when I joined, he said, when we realized it was you, he said, what we didn't realize, we were going to actually call you and ask you what you were doing. And then you answered the ad and said, it blew our minds. So I went down with my girlfriend, Lizzie, who later became involved with the Steamhammer compositions and things for Speech album, because she was an actress.
Right.
And she was my partner at the time. And so I went down, and there was Martin and Mick Bradley, drummer, lovely drummer, but no Kieran, because I hadn't realized that they weren't getting on very well with Kieran. So they sort of did the session with, they started playing with me at the so-called audition, although they'd already realized they were going to invite me to join the band anyway, because they'd seen me playing with Renaissance. So it was all a bit odd, really. And then I started, then we, because again, they were in a bit of a hurry too, because they had gigs waiting in Europe. And a bit like with Colosseum, they needed someone so quick to join, you see. So we did the audition, and then boom, we were rehearsing for our first gig in Zurich in a week's time. So I had to sort of, but luckily, their material was also loose. And, just like what I saw in that gig with Colosseum, when I saw them, there was so much room for me to improvise, and very little structure to their music apart from that, really. It was, it was what Martin Pugh and Mick wanted to do, was to get away from blues jams, which brings me back into Renaissance again, So the pattern was there in a way. It was destiny, in a sense, that I would suddenly be playing a really important role in Steamhammer in a way that none of us had visualized back then, at all. And when lovely Steve Davey had left the band, I think it was because Steve was more into blues and they wanted to get away from blues jams. You see, they wanted to do something, again, like with Renaissance, something completely different, as John Cleese would have said.
and now for some, yeah. Exactly.
So it was like suddenly I was in my comfort zone. Well, not too much comfort zone because there was a lot of challenges in other ways with it, because we had all the stuff going on as well where Kieran was uncomfortable with the new direction as well, and they weren't really getting on with him as well. So we did one tour with Kieran, and then we realized that we were going in an instrumental direction more, and it wasn't suiting Kieran either. So by the time we were sort of doing the second tour, Europe and Germany mainly, we were a three-piece for a little while, and then bringing in other vocalists, trying out other vocalists and things, until Mick's tragic death as well, which changed things again. So,
well, I have to say, over your career, you've been very fortunate, either being in the right place at the right time, not being you were not out of work for very long. In fact,
well,
jumping
I was
from
already,
one band,
yeah, I was quite, I suppose you could say I was famous by then as well as a bassist. Right. People were ringing me up, as well.
You're in demand.
Yeah, I was in demand by that time. And, I think they used to get a little bit, they'd make a joke about it sometimes. Said, when we're doing a gig somewhere, said, hey, everybody, don't you? They all come up and say, hi, man, to you. They don't say that to us. That's the way it is. I've always been like that. I've always expected the best, and it came to me, because what you expect is often what you create, as well. So.
That's very good. I like that. That's very good. Yeah. You mentioned the album Speech. Keith Relf produced it.
I brought Keith in because Keith and I, even though Renaissance broke up, Keith and I remained close, because we were spiritual buddies, and Jim as well. Even though, basically, the only reason that first band broke up really is because they had been exhausted by Yardbirds gigs, particularly Jim. Jim got unwell, and that was what happened. And we had to sort of call off of what was basically going to be a big gig in Lausanne, Switzerland. And it was the second time we went back to this lovely club there in a big hotel, posh hotel. It was in the basement of the hotel, and it was all lined up, for this, because when we came back from America, things were taking off, big time. And so we got to this gig in Switzerland, which was nearly, I think, the first one after we got back, more or less. And Jim was very unwell and had to come home, and we had to call it off. And all the TV cameras, everything was there, and it was a bit of a disaster, basically. The whole thing started to fall apart, and that's when things very quickly unwound for Renaissance. Now, you see. So, did you ask me a particular question? I've forgotten again now.
No, just that Keith, you couldn't break away from Keith. He's back.
Yeah.
He's back. Yeah.
Yeah, well, then eventually that led to, well, as I've already told you about some of the Steamhammer thing. So within the Steamhammer touring section, it's really hard to put it all together in short time for you, Greg, but basically what happened was that we were doing the Speech album, which is the first and only album until Axis later that I did with the Renaissance people, the Steamhammer band. So that was very much all our involvement with that as well. We were basically a threesome for a while, and we went into the studio to record Speech. And it was a really cold, horrible winter in London at the time. There were power cuts happening in the middle of our sessions and things. And then the Andy Johns, who was, he got ill as well, and he had to drop out, basically. I think he also found the material a bit unusual for him.
as well. And so we thought, well, okay, everything's going wrong, power cuts, everything. So and at the same time, by law of attraction and by destiny, Keith rang me up. He said, oh, I heard that Andy had some problems because he dropped out. He said, how about if I come and join you and help out, because I've been doing quite a lot of sort of interesting production. And I said, well, why don't you come down and co-produce it with us, and that's how he got involved with it. So it was lovely, coming back into touch with my old friend, and we had great fun after that, finishing it. And then we got it to the studio before the next disaster happened, basically. And before that happened, I got very close friends with Mick Bradley, Martin, and Martin. I was sharing a flat in Hampstead with my beloved Lizzie, who became involved with this. And we were sharing a flat with Ivan and Barry from the Jody Grind. That's all that.
Jody Grind.
And so we, Ivan and Van had this flat in Hampstead, and I rented part of the flat with my partner Lizzie, the actress. Before I joined Steamhammer, I had Rod Stewart rang me up one day. I just left Renaissance, and I was getting all sorts of interesting people calling me up because they knew about me then as well. And one of them was Rod, and one was King Crimson guitarist.
Robert Fripp.
Bob Fripp, yeah. They both were interested in what I was doing, because the unusual things I was doing with Renaissance, really, Fripp really liked that, and he wanted to see if it might work with King Crimson as well, because he was constantly changing the bands and things. So the Rod thing was very different from that. Rob was going much more into rock things, and he was with the Faces then. And he said, well, look, Ronnie Lane is unwell. He said, we've got this important session coming up, would you mind sitting in, and doing Ronnie's set, if you like, for things. So I went and did a little set for them, and that was just a one-off, basically. And then later it didn't work out. But then the other thing was the Fripp thing, which I didn't feel comfortable with, really. I said, well, I've got another band interested as well, and he said, well, this is going to be quite a big thing. I said, yeah. I said, but I want to honor you as well. I want you to get the right person for you for this as well. And the funny thing is that he later got Boz Burrell in, you see.
Oh, Burrell, yeah.
And Boz was one of these Norfolk friends as well. So it's all really funny connections.
Yeah.
So he got Boz in eventually to do it, and I evolved towards Steamhammer, and then we got, with Keith's help, we got Speech finished, and we were planning to go into the studio to record it. And one day, Mick and his girlfriend came up to Hampstead to visit me and his partner, my partner. And he showed me, he said, well, look, I haven't been feeling well. He said, I've got this rash, he said, on my tummy, he said, and he showed it to me. He said, what do you think? I said, well, I think it's probably something you should check out. He said, but I wouldn't be too concerned, if you feel okay to play on. He said, yes, of course, we do the album. He said, but I'm going to go back to Rugby and visit my family. So he went back. You'll have to cut some of this out because it's quite long. So he went back, and we were due to him to come back to be part of the production with us at the studio. So that was that weekend. He went out to his family,
and he was going to come back on the Monday. So we were in the studio mixing, and I got a call from Lizzie, my partner. She said, "Oh, my Mick's brother's just called. He's just died." And so we just sat there sort of in shock for a bit, and we sort of thought about, shall we carry on, and what would Mick want to happen? So eventually we carried on and finished the album, and but we came off the road for a while. At that time. And Keith stayed very much in touch with me all through that period as well. And it was ironic that the two musicians that have been in bands with musicians that had died while I was with them were Mick and Keith, So
Right.
It was showing me something. It was saying to me, there's another dimension to your life here. So take all this in and learn from it. And this is my spiritual paths began to involve.
Right. There you go. See, you picked up on that. And we talked about before we started this about the spiritual side. You said, traumatic experiences, in your life. Yeah. Exactly.
Those are the two. Yeah, those are the main two things. Because I had, sort of probably fairly unique to have been two bands. Although Keith was going to be part, Keith, I've told this story in the box set of the Illusion Reformed Renaissance, because Keith was the instrumental in reforming Illusion with us. You see, he came round one day and he really had this idea. He wanted to get the original Renaissance members together. And Jane and Keith arrived at my front door, and I was staying at Peter Frampton's house at the time. In his ex-wife is a good friend of mine, and I was living there with her for a bit. And they turned up one day. Keith and Jane turned up with a royalty check for me that had gone to Keith for some Renaissance money. And I said, "Oh, look, there's a little bit of money here for you." He said, "How do you feel about reforming the original band?"
Yeah.
So I had a check in hand,
Yeah.
Jane, and Jane gave me a big hug. And I said, "Well, let me think about it for a couple of seconds." And I said, "Well, okay, let's do it." 2 seconds later, I said, "Okay, let's call Jim. Let's call John." So that's what happened. That's how it all began again. But then sadly, while Keith's health wasn't great at that time anyway, but while that was all going on, just while we were it was the day before he died, I was with Keith at Keith's flat. Long story, I won't go into the sad details, but we were ringing Jerry Moss and people that were connected with Armageddon, and seeing if we could get something going for this new idea. And then after I left, I said, "Well, okay, let's talk tomorrow." And we did a little meditation together. Then I heard later that Jim had turned up that night as well. After I'd gotten home, and was sitting with him, and they were talking through some of the possibilities. And that was the night that, before he died, So the next morning, his son, Danny, found him slumped over his gear in the basement of the house that he was living in. And that was, the beginning of how Illusions came together eventually, because eventually we decided to go ahead with it in Keith's honor.
Right.
To
carry on. You guys carried on, right?
Yeah, we knew Keith would have. It was Keith's love that put the band together again. The Illusion band, all our love, but Keith's initially, and Jane's. And so we thought, well, Keith would definitely want, because this was his band as well. Before Steamhammer broke up, one of the original members, Martin Quittenton, wonderful guitarist, who incidentally had been working as Rod Stewart's partner in, they wrote Maggie May together and things like that. So when that sort of folded I think Rod was going in another direction, Martin was going in a direction. Now Martin Quittenton had noticed that I was playing with Martin Pugh and all the people that he had been with in Steamhammer before he left, because he left, well before I joined Steamhammer. So I hadn't met Martin yet, but he saw I was in the band and remembered all the classical stuff. And he got all this material that he'd written with no band. And he thought it would be great if he could bring his material in and blend it with our speech material and make up a set of his compositions and Steamhammer material that we were doing, the stuff that we composed without him in as in the speech album. So because he saw he had written some parts that included some classical music that he'd written that fitted the profile of the stuff that I'd done with John Hawkin in a way as well. See, so we got to start. So he rejoined Steamhammer in 1973, and so we had all this material that's sort of coming out. It was all this amazing stuff coming. All these lovely compositions, which I don't think you've heard any of that. The Axis stuff. No. So Martin Pugh and I by then had, because of all the tragedies with Steamhammer, we got a new drummer in since then as well, John Lingwood. And so we had this three-piece band really that Martin joined in early 1973. So we started putting together a whole new set based on a mixture of the speech material and Martin's wonderful compositions. And that became Axis, which is this band that I'm still involved with, wanting to get finished. I want to do it because I love those two albums, and I did some of probably my most important work on the bowed bass then. Because there wasn't a lot of it before then. Really, it was all Steamhammer. Really, I didn't do it at all with Renaissance. Although it had been charted as doing that. But so suddenly we're doing this wonderful compositions of Martin's and somehow bringing them together with the speech material and doing some gigs. So we did the Marquee Club with that set as well. And we brought in a singer from America, an American singer called Bruce Payne, who was an actor singer. And he toured with us for a bit doing this particular set, with Martin's material and some songs with some vocals as well in it as well. So we got a few songs brought into it as well. So it was a very, very, very funny, very creative, but very unusual set, really. And that gradually led to Armageddon, you see, without us realizing it at the time. Because Martin and I, were well established together at that time. Martin Pugh, Martin Quittenton joined, and we created Axis, which was short-lived, basically, lasted about the length of 1973. Okay. And somehow it fizzled out. I don't know how. I can't remember exactly how it fizzled out, really, because we had intended to, we did tour with it as Steamhammer Axis, if you like.
Yeah. Well, has there been any talk in recent years about releasing the material with Axis?
Yes, it has been. Try to sort of paint a picture of it for you, because when Axis broke up, it sort of fizzled out. I can't remember exactly how now. Suddenly we toured Germany and Europe with Martin Quittenton, tried the Axis material out, and it had been met with some dismay because everyone was expecting Steamhammer blues jams suddenly to have the bow bass starting the set, and going into these Martin Quittenton compositions and our
stuff, and then it was all very new to them, like it had been with Renaissance in a way, with the early days with the session. So it started up again, this strange love-hate thing with an audience, really, although they were very impressed with it once they got used to and started to hear how good it was, basically, because it was some pretty mind-blowing stuff, some of it, with me playing this Jimi Hendrix pedal bass stuff. So that shut them up, actually, because we had a few when I started the set with this very quiet sort of little bit of music, and then the audience got a little bit restless now and then as well, because they would hear this stuff, and then some of Martin's gentle little accompaniments going with it. They got a little bit, one or two of the audience got a bit impatient until I switched the pedal on, and it shut them up, basically. It blows the roof off. So it was a very, I love that period because it was so creative, but in a way, it was sort of making way for Armageddon to come.
Armageddon, Stairway with Jim McCarty and Jane Ralph on vocals.
Well, Stairway evolved out of me leaving this group, the spiritual part, big spiritual organization. Now, when Jim found out in the grapevine that I'd left, he called me up one day, and because we were, we hadn't met much, because I think he was a bit wary of this community as well, and he didn't want to get involved with it. As soon as he found out I was a free bird again, if you like, he contacted me and said, "Oh, what are you doing? Do you fancy sort of picking up from where we left off?" He said, "I've got some ideas, and I'd love you to play guitar and bass on them." And I said, "Well, I've been writing. I'm a writer now, Jim." I said, "I'm doing a lot more writing now." He said, "Well, let's see what we got then." And so I used to go around. I went round to his flat. His marriage had finished by then, and he was living. They were very good friends still, his partner and him, and so the two of us just met up and started, writing stuff. Basically, he had a keyboard. I took a guitar or a bass round, and we started seeing what we had, really, and eventually it led to the first album we did, which we called, you'll probably know better than I. The first album we did, we got, that's right, we contacted this company called New World Cassettes, and this lovely couple, and they were looking for new music. So me and Jim McCarty, we've got some ideas. And the first thing we did was called Aquamarine. This was a song Jim and I wrote called Aquamarine. And they heard it and really loved it. And said, "Well, we got more stuff." So they liked it. And so we released it as a cassette on their company, because it was called New World Cassettes, but they were doing really well at the time. And so that was where it all began, with Stairway. Basically, we were looking at doing more and more of this new age music. So we did Aquamarine and Moonstone as our two first cassettes, which later became released as CDs as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was really very enjoyable time. So we would basically just pool our ideas, and he'd write something, I'd write something. I'd play guitar, more than bass, some bass as well. We found that guitar, electroacoustic guitar, worked really well with the compositions. And I even played the bass lines sometimes on a guitar, which I bought from Jim. He had an Ovation 6-string guitar, which sounded really nice on the initial things we did. So I would play, sometimes I'd play guitar solos or bass on
4 strings of the guitar, you know.
Okay.
Which worked right well on Aquamarine. I played the bass on Aquamarine, the song that we created, and another song called Bird of Paradise, which is a lovely little song which we swapped over. Actually, I wrote the lyrics and Jim wrote the music too.
Well, who was Malcolm Stern?
Well, Malcolm is a dear friend of mine who became a friend of both of ours, actually, because he had, it's quite a complicated one, really. He had met me when I was in this group in the meditation community. And he'd come around one day because he had these ideas that he wanted to put, because he used to bring people together in groups. His speciality as a psychotherapist and spiritual person was to bring people together in groups and get them dancing, expressing themselves to music. And he knew, he'd met me when I was in this group. He'd gone around because he had started something in a church in Piccadilly called the St. James Church, which was a Christopher Wren built church. And he had a thing going on there where he would bring groups together and do his work with them. He would create stories and dance to music, and he wanted live music as well, and then he met me at that time, and we hit it off really well. And after I left the group, he rang me one day and said, I've got this, I live in Totnes now in Devon. He said, I've got these musicians there, he said, and I'm doing some stuff with dance with them as well. He said, well, they haven't got a bass player, and I remembered you, and because we'd become friends by then. He said, would you mind coming down and just sitting in with them, and we just see how it evolves, So that was eventually how it evolved into us working with Jim as Stairway as well. Yeah.
Okay. Because I saw his name there too.
2 albums, yeah, because we did 2 albums based on ideas that Malcolm had. Because Malcolm, he was really into things like he used to get dances around the themes that he wanted to do, and one of them was one eventually that led to one of the albums we did, which was the bestseller album we did with New World, which was called Medicine Dance, which was based on Malcolm's idea of creating music around a dance that was themed around the totem animals of the medicine wheel, the American Indian medicine wheel. So that became Medicine Dance, the album. So it was Malcolm's idea and our music. He wasn't a musician, so we created the music for his idea. And then we created it, and we did it live a few times with him at the church as well, which is amazing.
Was it well received live?
Yes, because although it wasn't a church audience, these were New Agey people. That the rector of the church was a lovely priest who wanted to bring all faiths to come together to talk their differences through and come together in the church.
Okay.
And so this is how Malcolm got to be invited there as well. And so we had this lovely experience where we did a couple of concerts there of doing Medicine Dance there. Even one time we did it with his groups, because he used to conduct groups all around the globe. Actually, he still does, where he brings people together to come together in a dance format and in a meditation format. And he goes around the world doing that still. And he's the one that did my podcast as well. Through
okay, right.
Coming onto all these little connections now.
All right. Well, I think there's definitely room for that in this world. That what you're just referring to. Yeah.
Well, it's sort of bringing us right up to the present day with this idea, which I can't tell you much about because I haven't discussed it enough yet. But we did those 3. We did Chakra Dance and Medicine Dance with Malcolm. These were the two where we did with his groups, with us playing live, etc. And the last one we did was Medicine Dance, which was the one that sold the most. But I like both albums, and they're both still available in a way as well. I think they've been re-released a few times. But these were years ago, you know, like, you know, 25, 30 years ago. And out of the blue, after Malcolm did this podcast with me, I started to think a little bit about all the things that we did then that were really well received. And one of them was and some ideas we had for a sequel to Medicine Dance, which never came about. And a weird thing happened. I was in down in Devon recently, staying with friends, and the guitarist friend who played on Medicine Dance, friend of mine, was down there. And evidently I'd showed him something when we were in London sometime. I'd showed him this little passage that I played, and he learnt it and never forgot it. He said, "Oh, do you remember this?" He said, "Well, I was in Devon recently." He started me playing me this thing that I showed him way back then. I said, "Oh God, what's that? Did I write that?" I said, "You wrote it, don't you remember? You showed it to me." And because I was fascinated by the format, so it's nothing like anything I'd done before. Even when because he, on the Medicine Dance album, he played lead guitar bits on, he did the little Jeff Beck slides and things on Medicine Dance, you see. And he said, "Well, that was great," he said, "but this," he said, "I just couldn't forget this out of my head," he said. "And ever since you showed me this about 25 years ago," he said, "I've been playing it ever since because I liked it," he said. And he played it to me and I didn't remember it. So I had to relearn what he played.
your own material.
Yeah, but I remember, he said, and I remembered it was called, I called it Circle Dance, you see. So I wanted it to be a sequel to the other two dance albums. And he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "God, yeah, that would work, wouldn't it?" So I told Jim about this recently. So we discussed the possibility of this becoming like a long time after sequel to Medicine Dance. But I've got some ideas for it, which I haven't played. I played them to Dougal, the guitarist, but I haven't played them to Jim yet because I've got to work out a way to record them and send them to him. So I'm trying to get into GarageBand a little bit. I might just have to do it on my phone and send him. But I've got a few ideas for that. And I said to him, "Well, I want you, Dougal, everyone else, and Jane, if she's able to sing again, to be part of this, you know, as well, and put your input in and put your tracks in as well, and we'll do them all as a circle dance, you know." But we haven't got that far yet because I don't think Jane wants to sing again now. But if I can persuade her to, I'd love her to sing again. We even talked about possibly asking Annie Haslam to do it if Jane can't.
Oh, Annie, yeah.
It needs there's sort of possibilities there, you know, because I'm very friendly with Leo Traversa. He's a bassist who has been working with Annie recent times. And he loves all the stuff that I did with Renaissance. And he used to ring me up sometimes, not ring me, he used to email me and say, "Well, how did you do that?" You know, so that's fine, I did it that way. He said, "Oh, I thought you might do it that way." So he's become a friend on Facebook as well. And I thought, well, why not? You know, let's just see, you know, anything can come together. Because Leo said to me another weird thing. He said, "Well, look, did you know that Annie's doing a farewell tour with the latest form of Renaissance? But unfortunately, I can't do it because I've got family issues going on." She's got another bass player, she said. But he said to me, "Wouldn't it be poetic? It would be very poetic if the original Renaissance bass player was to play on the farewell gig." You know?
Right.
Well, you know, I'm not going to do it, you know, because basically I did say to him, "Well, it'd be really funny, Leo." I said, "But I think it's going to be one too many for me, because this is why I've got this thing going." So I explained a little bit to him. I said, "But it won't rule out necessarily people that are involved with." Oh, he said another funny thing. He said, "But did you realize that all these people Annie's got working with, they're all Italian American background. Frank Pagano and some other guy. He said he's got an English name. He said, but his real name, and he told me it's a sort of an Italian name that is based on this name. He said, she's got all these Italians working there. So, and the weird thing that I hadn't told you was that in about 1980-ish, Jim and I were going to do something with Annie when the New Age thing started, the punk thing started happening. Annie was without a band for a while, and Jim, me and Annie and Jim got together to do a few sessions to see if we could work out some material. It didn't come to anything in the end, but we got quite friendly into it. So it'd be really quite poetic in a way if something does come out of this, even if
right.
It might not be a farewell. Well, what I thought was it won't be a farewell because I don't do farewells, but I do hellos. You know, it will be an introduction. It'll be something new for people as well, rather than back.
Well, I thought about I thought about that, and when even with the circle dance, the full circle, aspect. Right.
Yeah, you got it. You're getting it. It's perfectly that. See, what I saw of this, because it very much links in with my spiritual path, is the circle dance idea that we had then was a little bit. It was more. It hadn't developed enough to take him where that would go, but as I started thinking about it, I could see dervishes, getting really high, going round in these wonderful circles of consciousness, if you like, and then connecting that with any other things that other people wanted to add to it as well, So that's where I'm sort of going with it. It could be a hello for any of these people, even Leo. I might ask Leo to come and play some stuff as well, So I think he plays a few other instruments. But he's a New Yorker,
those New Yorkers.
Yeah. So if I can get it a little bit more organized, I'll sort of play you. I've only got a couple of ideas at the moment. So it takes some time to get it formed.
Well, Louis, it's been really enjoyable. I appreciate you doing this and taking time out.
Thank you as much, Stairway. It's been really nice to do and share. It's very different from the other things I've done, which has been quite interesting as well. So,
I hear that. I hear that quite a bit, and that's what I want it to be. I want it to be.
Yes, I think that always. I think the good thing with podcasts and anything to do with putting yourself into a new direction with something is it'll always bring up something surprising.
That's right.
We'll talk soon.
All right. All the best to you. Okay.
All the best. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.